Welcome to the Chuan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, qigong, and meditation. This week we continue our discussion on Yang Cheng Fu. We continue looking at stories of Yang's life from Deng Ming-Dao's book, The Wandering Taoist. Then we cover the phrase from the Tai Chi Classics, Tai Chi Chuan is like a torrential river. That leads into a discussion of the 13 postures of Tai Chi Chuan, the 5 directions, and the 8 energies. And then in this week's Patreon episode, we discuss the concept of true constancy and remaining conscious within action. This is centered around the concept of the sensual equilibrium, or the Zhongding, which is the concept in Tai Chi Chuan of sort of unified center. And Jess also gets a bit more into the life and times of Lu Dongbin, the Taoist immortal who is attributed to have written the 100-character tablet that we are pulling from. So hope you check that out. We also have a recent interview we did with one of our senior classmates, Mike McConnell. Mike's out of Denver, Colorado. He has been training internal martial arts since the late 70s. So he's got quite the story to tell about Bruce and just his life and training. And so it's quite an informative interview. So check it out. All right. Take care of yourselves and enjoy the episode.
In today's episode, we're continuing our look at Yang-style Tai Chi. And today's teacher is Yang Cheng Fu. And he's usually known as the guy who sort of simplified things from the more combative earlier style of his grandfather, Yang Luchan. However, in this book, The Wandering Taoist by Deng Ming-Dao, they show the other side to Yang Cheng Fu in this semi-fictional account that takes place in the 1920s, I think. Young Sai Hung is visiting this Tai Chi master and learning the Tai Chi style. So it starts like this. Sai Hung had the opportunity not only to see Tai Chi's technique, but his uncle Yang's reputed cruel side. One night, the entire Yang family in school had gone out to dinner. As they left the restaurant, Yang Cheng Fu, walking at the head of the family, suddenly cried out, "Stand back!" 2 men dropped a pig-catching basket on top of him. It was a narrow, coarsely woven rattan cylinder that imprisoned his body and arms tightly. Master Yang struggled a bit until one of the men gave him a kick and the basket rolled unrestrainedly down a hill. The 2 assailants, probably men who sought fame through defeating the great Yang Cheng Fu, quickly followed with drawn sabers. 2 accomplices waited at the bottom of the hill. "Are you all here?" inquired Master Yang when he reached the bottom. The men responded by raising their sabers. "All right," said Master Yang. He inhaled mightily and flexed his arms. The basket ripped easily. Master Yang stood up. By the dim glow of the street lanterns, he was suddenly a menacing juggernaut. "You wanted to take my life," he said in a low growl. "It's too bad you haven't made it. Take a look around. Today is your last day on Earth." The men attacked savagely. In an unhurried, methodical way, Yang Cheng Fu sidestepped the saber attacks and killed the first 2 men by dealing each a rapid blow over their hearts. He killed the last 2 in rapid succession by snapping their necks. It was a casual matter to him. So that's one of the best fight stories about Yang Luchan I've ever heard. That's the only one I've ever heard.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty good.
Took out 4 dudes in a row.
Yeah. I mean,
That's pretty badass.
They home alone him, they tried to like trap him. And
so they trapped him with the basket, but then he just ripped out of it, just hulked out and tore it off. And
did it to his little pungji.
He had these 4 guys with swords and he took them all out.
Right.
Dang. That's what I'm talking about.
That's
See, Tai Chi's got a lot more to it.
Yeah. That's
So what do you think? One more martial arts story. It said the next story about Yang Cheng Fu says, in China's highly competitive martial arts world, no art could call itself the great ultimate unless it was prepared to prove it. Yang Cheng Fu's brother, father, uncle, and grandfather were all great fighters. Historically, Tai Chi Chuan established its standing in the martial world by successfully overcoming all challengers. Its only serious competition came from Xingyi Tren and Baguazhang. At the time, Xingyi, Bagua, and Tai Chi were integrated together to be known collectively as the internal system, with Tai Chi recognized as the highest form. When Sai-Hung was living in Master Yang's school, he noticed a bedridden man. Was this, he discreetly inquired of his classmates, a sick member of the Tai Chi school? No, they told him. It was a Xingyi master who had challenged Yang Cheng Fu 4 months ago and had lost. During the match, the Xingyi master had attacked violently, and Yang Cheng Fu had initially contented himself with dodging. Before long, though, he wondered how seriously the Xingyi master intended to harm him. The Xingyi master was also an internal boxer, and it was hard to decide. Just as his hand chopped at Yang Cheng Fu's head, Master Yang dodged, grabbed a vase, and held it where his own head had been. The Xingyi master could not stop himself. His hand struck the vase. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then the vase, which had remained whole, suddenly developed hairline cracks and disintegrated in Master Yang's hand. Seeing that the Xingyi master was truly using internal energy for the purpose of ultimate destruction, Yang Cheng Fu struck him with a palm blow that sent his body crashing through the doors and left him bleeding from the eyes, nose, and mouth. It had not been a death blow, however, and Yang Cheng Fu kept the man in the school to heal him. The Xingyi man had not yet recovered, but everyone assured Sai-Hung that he soon would. Dang, crashing through the doors. That happens quite a bit in internal martial arts stories.
Yeah, that's...
Oh!
So he tested it. He used the the vase or whatever to test if he could, how serious the guy was about hurting him.
Right. If it was just a hard blow that broke the vase, that's no big deal. But he was using internal force, which caused minute cracks to appear. That's brutal.
Yeah.
Then after 4 months, the dude's still recovering in bed. That one, I mean, again, I've never heard those ones in any of the other Yang style books, but
no, I mean, it's
I choose to believe these ones.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the guy got into fights.
I mean, in his younger days, he's not that big fat guy. His first book, he's pretty fit looking dude doing the postures, and so who knows?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a good story, and it's like I said last time. This guy's kind of the Carlos Castaneda type of thing, where
exactly right.
There's some truth in there for sure. And there's also probably some embellishments to make it sound good,
But there's, one side of the Yang family is there's sort of these harsh guys who train their kids or their disciples to the point of injury. Then there's the more nice guy, like the sort of bigger, larger size young guys who are more gregarious.
I mean, and obviously the purpose of the story is to elevate him to the level of his, brother, uncle, grandfather.
So even though he's known for being Mr. Nice Guy who cooperated with other martial arts school, he did have a harsher side. And he's more known for push hands. Like he's the guy who brought out push hands. His book had, his early book had push hands in it. And so I think he promoted that as a way to do two-person activity. So he's known for that rather than for his fighting skill like his grandfather.
Well, it was, it's a product of, I've talked about this before, but it was the times, right? I mean, this is the height of, Yang Cheng Fu's life was, you're talking about the warlord period, essentially, which was a turbulent time in China. To
say the least.
Not everybody had the privilege to just hang out and do push hands. So there was a lot of stuff going on politically that didn't make it so cool to be like, hey, look at me, I can fight, right? Because well, if you wanted to
stick your head up,
well, and if you wanted to show that you could fight, well, here's a rifle, go fight the invading Japanese, or go fight the communists or the KMT, right? I mean, it was
the warlords, exactly,
the warlords. I mean, so it was, there was a lot of opportunity to show your fighting spirit, as it were, outside.
And I mean, they make the point here, like, you can't call yourself Tai Chi and be the ultimate unless you're willing to stand up for that, especially back in the older days. So, I mean, there must be something in there about Tai Chi's had a reputation, what deserved or not, at one point,
Well, and I mean, not to get too off topic, but in the book, he talks about being a Taoist priest, being a monk, and having to make the choice, as a spiritual person, when is it time to fight? Like, when do you just say enough is enough and actually, use your martial arts to fight someone else, like, and
Righteousness,
kill
yeah,
them, and and all this
right.
stuff, and so I think it's
Grapples with that a lot, yeah.
you know
And that in Chinese arts, martial arts have an element of that. They're not necessarily, in sports, you just try to win without hurting the other person. That's a given. But like in martial arts, it's for sport, it's for fighting, it's for war, it's for everything. So you have to grapple with those bigger questions. And Tai Chi always presents that sense of calmness and and not necessarily kindness, but at least not non-hormonal. It's more like there's an intellectual side to it.
yeah. And one of the things that uh you know the fighting tradition of Tai Chi makes very clear is that push hands isn't fighting. Doing applications with your friends isn't fighting. Fighting is fighting, and that all the
Right.
stuff you do to train is completely separate from the act, because the act of fighting includes this thing of the other person actually wanting to hurt you.
Right. And especially
Um,
ambushing you, right? And catching you in a basket. So you're holding your
yeah,
arms back. That's the
yeah,
story is like, shit,
right.
he can't
So
even move his arms and he has to fight his way out of that
yeah. So I
against an
mean,
armed opponent, man.
it's a good metaphor, or a good,
Definitely.
yeah.
All right. There's one more story, and this one's a doozy.
Boy.
It said he returned to the school several times to study Tai Chi, even after Master Yang's death. But before he left at the end of his first stay there, he saw Fu Zhensong, the Bagua master, challenge Yang Cheng Fu. Now, Fu Zhensong, people who do Bagua know him as the tornado style Bagua. He
Hmm.
was, and he also balanced heavy stones and carried the weights. So it says he arrives to challenge him. During the match, Fu Zhensong, a short, stocky, and young fighter, circled Master Yang in the constant style of his dragon form Baguazhang. Master Yang stood at the center of the circle in a standing meditative pose and closed his eyes. He was statically building up internal energy for the fight. Fu Zhensong, by circling, was dynamically charging himself up for the clash. He circled for almost half an hour, never varying his pace. Master Yang remained still. Suddenly, Fu Zhensong dashed straight to the center. Master Yang's eyes opened instantly, and he knocked Fu down. Following his opponent's stumbling body, he brought his fist and considerable body weight smashing down on Fu Zhensong's heart. But Fu also had great internal energy, so he was able to resist the force of the blow. Although he conceded defeat, he was able to walk away.
He lists Yang Cheng Fu as one of his teachers. So my
So they
guess
did
is
meet.
this is one of those,
Testing.
testing things, and then you
Yeah.
say, all right, well, you got enough to kick my ass, so I'll study with you for a little while. But
Right. He didn't concede
uh,
defeat necessarily.
he was a student of that Wudong sword guy we were talking about as well.
Oh, Immortal Sword Lee.
Yeah, yeah.
General Lee.
Li
Yeah.
Jinglin.
Interesting. So these guys all did run in pretty connected crowd of sort of the nationalist China of the 1920s and 30s. That old Shanghai kind of scene of like T.T. Liang talks about that time period.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the reason he uses Fu's name as opposed to some other guy is, just that he's fairly well known. And
But I mean, clearly he did show up to Yang Cheng Fu's, and that could have been their
Yeah.
first meeting where it was sort of inconclusive.
right.
He circled a while, he stood a while, and then boom.
Yeah.
That's classic, though.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that he circled him for half an hour, that's part of that fantasy of Bagua where you like circle your opponent until they get
Yeah.
dizzy or whatever. Like that's coming from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about.
Also,
Probably.
if you're watching a fight, I mean, and someone's circling around and nothing's happening, it might feel like a half hour.
Right.
It's only been like 3 minutes or something.
Right. Especially if you're the one doing the fighting, it's like it feels like forever, and then
Right.
you're like, no, that was just 1 minute. All right, now let's take a look at Uncovering the Secrets of Internal Power in Tai Chi by Bai Hua. So we've been going through his commentary on the Tai Chi Jing, one of the Tai Chi classics. So the next line is, the spirit of Tai Chi Chuan is like a torrential river flowing continuously. And that's a pretty famous quote. I think we've seen that in tons of different articles and books over the years, of the idea of Tai Chi is a flowing river or a surging sea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an easy metaphor for what you're trying when you're trying to talk about softness and evasion, moving around things, and not being, going with the flow, quote unquote. A river is always
Exactly.
an easy
Yeah.
analogy.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty clear. So Baihua starts his commentary by saying, "What makes a river or sea surge? As Lao Tzu says, too much information will lead to delusion. If we try to understand all the factors individually, it would be too complicated to serve as a useful metaphor." He says, so he breaks it down to two reasons. He said there's two reasons why a torrential river can be forever surging. The first reason is in the way the river gathers itself at its origin point and flows as a unified force. This is a metaphor for the unification and domination of the Dantian. So I guess my interpretation of what he's saying here is like a river, from the beginning to end, it all is coming together in one big thing. So the river at the top, it's still a river at the bottom, like it's a unified force. It's one long thing that's still forever moving. And so he says that the Dantian is somehow that same
Well,
idea.
it,
It
it, it,
unifies your whole system.
it's the idea of a river has to have a source, right? So there's an infinite source of something that can flow is your Dandian or Dandians, but
Right.
so he's making this analogy between the source of a river and the source of your energy slash movement.
That are both within it and the source of it. They're like, it's all one at the
It's
same time
unbroken
as it's
from
yeah,
the
yeah.
source.
So yeah, there's that river metaphor. So he says the second reason is that the way a river picks up strength as it flows downhill. This is an analogy to the continuous circulation of jin, or internal force, through the body's unified internal connections. This is how you create the 13 postures of Tai Chi Chuan. So yeah, the way it picks up strength as it flows down. There's something about how the energy, like the more it connects to other energy, it becomes stronger, perhaps.
Yeah, it's what we would sometimes refer to as a snowball effect, right? As
Mm.
you gather more and more of this stuff flowing from the source, it gets stronger, and then as it starts to move down, right, it has to change and become other things as it morphs to fit the landscape, right? So as that river moves over rocks, it becomes one thing. When it has to carve through a sand block, it becomes another thing. When it's, dipping under to let some fish through or whatever, I mean, it's like, I don't know. Again, that's this.
And yeah, and the individual shapes it makes, that's an analogy of the 13 postures of Tai Chi Chuan, which is just the energy flow taking different forms. So Peng and Liu are different forms of the same sort of internal energy, just taking different shapes.
Right. So he's saying that Jing, the force is the internal force, right? Is constant, and yet it can change into different things, right? So it's
Makes sense.
yeah.
So the next one, his final statement on this idea of the river metaphor, he says, Tai Chi Chuan is also known as long fist. This isn't in reference to Shaolin long fist. Rather, it is in reference to the way that one embodies the jin, or inner force, flowing continuously and endlessly, unified in the expression of a single move. So yeah, just like we were saying, the jin is just moving endlessly and flowing in different shapes, therefore long
Well,
fist.
right. I mean, this is just clarifying, because there are other martial arts that do different stuff that also call themselves long fist. He's clarifying, yes, it's also called long fist, but it's called long fist for a different reason.
So now the classic moves into describing the 13 postures, or naming them.
Right. So now he's listing off the variations that you're going to get as you roll down the hill.
So it divides the 13 postures into two different groups, 8 and 5. So he says the classic says the 13 postures: Peng, warding off; Liu, rolling back; Ji, pressing; An, pushing; Tsai, pulling down; Lie, splitting; Zhou, elbowing; Kao, body stroke. This is Bagua, 8 diagrams. Now the next are Jin, advancing; Tui, retreating; Gu, shifting left, Pan, shifting right, and Zongding, central equilibrium. This is Wu Xing, or 5 elements. So it divides the 13 postures into Bagua and Wu Xing, which is an interesting way of, maybe it's a way of memorizing things better if you can form them in these familiar shapes, right?
It's as I understand it, which is pretty good. You got 4, which is the 4 directions, right? You got up, down, forward, and back, right? So you have 4, right? Like 4 energies. Those 4 combine to make 4 more, which give you 8, right? So that's the split, pull down, shoulder, and elbow, right?
Mm.
And then those are the techniques, if you will, right? So you have 8 techniques, and then you put those 8 techniques on top of moving in any direction or staying in one place, or having a central, stability point is more accurate. But just to keep it simple, you've got the middle and you've got moving. And so when you combine those, you get, the whole of the art, which is 13. It's also kind of, I think, saying, look, we've got Bagua Zhang and Xingyi are contained in what we do, right? I mean, it's just kind of a selling point.
Well, it's kind of, and so moving on to that, he says, he begins by saying, he says the spatial arrangement of Tai Chi, Wuxing, and Bagua is, so he gives the order of how they come about. So he says, at first there's Tai Chi, then there's Liang Yi, yin and yang, then there's San Kai, 3 talents, then there's Si Xiang, 4 icons, then there's Wu Xing, 5 elements, then there's Liu He, heaven, earth, and the 4 directions, then there's Qi Zhang, 7 stars, then there's Bagua, 8 diagrams, and finally there's Jiu Gong, 9 palaces. According to the above arrangement, it can be seen that there is Tai Chi first, then the 5 elements, and then Bagua. Therefore, Tai Chi dominates the 5 elements, from which the Bagua derives from. And then he says, I'm speaking about the concepts, not the fist theory, which will not be explained. But in a way, he's saying Tai Chi is better than Xingyi and Bagua. And they said, I don't mean that in martial arts sense. I just mean in this, which comes first,
He's saying in theory that would place this one at the top, right? But that's not accurate when you get into the real world and start talking about fighting.
But cosmologically speaking, Tai Chi comes first and is therefore the more primal concept than the others, basically.
It drives or contains all of the other stuff inside of it, yeah.
So he continues his discussion here. Although the Bagua plus the Wu Xing are divided into the 13 postures, the 13 postures must be united and dominated by one, unity. Otherwise, they cannot be unified. 13 postures must be manifested in one dominant position. Otherwise, they will not be able to show the tortuous and torrential momentum of the great river directed by the changeful terrain. So he's back to the river metaphor.
Right, you need to have a stable point in order to withstand change. So that's the Zhongding. It'll
fall apart if you don't have that unification throughout it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the phrase I like is continuous motion, constant stability, right? You have something that is always moving and it's always stable in that motion, right? So in Tai Chi, it's more of a metaphor because you're not always moving your feet, but you are always moving something. He's just
coincidentally, his next paragraph says, in Tai Chi Chuan, Zongding, central equilibrium, is the balance point. Dantian is Tai Chi. Since the gravity of the earth is vertical and the center of gravity of the body, the Dantian, is also on the vertical line of gravity, the Dantian represents the Zongding.
Right. So this is saying that the place where you find that sensual equilibrium resides inside your lower Dantian.
Right. That's this kind of the key. It's like the shortcut, not the shortcut, but the one, if you can cling to that one spot, you can eventually fully comprehend the whole Zongding, the whole central equilibrium from top to bottom from that stability point. So what he says here is that therefore Zongding, central earth element, dominates advancing, front fire element, retreating, rear water element, left shifting left wood element, and right shifting right metal element.
So he's just giving you the 5 elements for the directions.
Right. So like that's just what you were saying. The Zongding is the earth element in the center that keeps you from shifting left, right, or forward or back in a clumsy way.
Which starts with your spine, then it goes to your lower dantian, and then it goes to your central channel.
So and when it comes to Zongding, there's layers of training there to truly reach the very centralist of the central.
Right. I mean, Bob has a little diagram in his book of it, and he kind of refers to it as sort of like unrefined to refined.
That right.
You're
so when I say Zongding is the central channel, I mean, I think that's the Chinese. Oh, I guess Zhongmai might mean central channel.
Right. So the Zhongding lives in the Zhongmai is kind of the way I think of it.
So like
but your access. But your access route to it, because you're, unless you're some sort of, savant, and you can go just directly to your central channel, is you have to go through your lower dantian,
your spine,
and your spine.
So those are the things you could feel more. More refined sensation could bring you to the very centralist of the central of the very centralist thread,
Yeah, and the closer you can sort of get to it, the more refined it is, like the less you have to move it for it to affect the whole thing.
Interesting.
So this is the idea of, you have a very little pivot point in the center, but it affects the larger thing on the outside.
So that's the dantian as like a acupuncture point, or as a more of a sphere that fills up your whole lower body. Different people are working with the dantian at different sizes, kind of.
He refers to it as this control point, right? You don't lose the control or the one, because I'll use the science fiction metaphor. I just think of it as, those Japanese mech thingies where you got like a little guy in the middle, and sort of what he does, the big robot does.
Right.
That's essentially how your lower dantian functions. Is what you make happen in there is how it affects the rest of your body. So, it kind of is, it's the source of how you move. It's not necessarily the movement itself, but that's where it has to originate from.
So he
again, like I said, I would just say this as all the movements come from your lower dantian. It's a lot shorter, but he's really going, on a journey.
Yeah, I guess you gotta work your way through it bit by bit to kind of like prove it exists, kind of, I suppose.
It'd be a short book if you did it my way.
Right. So he says the 8 movements deriving from the 5 directions is still dominated by the Zhongding. And on the basis of the Zhongding dominating the 5 elements, there is the 8-gate Jin that alludes to the tortuous and torrential Great River guided by the changeful terrain. So my interpretation is this here is there's the Zhongding dominates everything. You move in the 5 directions, and then you use the 8 different forms of Jin. That's the changeful terrain that your body's running through. Is the 8 different shapes that it takes while you move in 5 different directions.
The myriad of 10,000 things, right?
Yeah.
Because really that's what he's saying, is that the 13 postures is just a metaphor for all movement.
Right, any movement you make.
And
the 5 directions is a metaphor for every different step you could take in whatever direction. Right. So he finishes by saying here, only in this way can we achieve the supporting force in all directions, and we can have all sources of power. In the Tai Chi Chuan repertoire, only Zongding can dominate the coordinated body movements, the unified cycle of endless and changing momentums of Jin, force. So Zongding is the it dominates the joint coordination, the coordinated body movement that you're trying to do. Yeah, that's what he said before, and he says it
This
again.
is, well, this is the sometimes the phrase "string of pearls" is used, right? This is the idea that
Coordinated joints.
right, that your body's not made up of one. It's not one thing. It's a string. It's a line of things that have to connect. But all of those things that connect have to move as one piece. And so this is the joints refers to not joints in your body, but like connection pieces, right? Like Lego parts, right? So you have these components that have to link, right? And in order for them to link, you have to have these, you know, five directions and eight, energies. Thus gives you, the stability, the Zhongding.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, we'll continue next time.
All right, man.
Talk to you later.
Talking to you. Yep, take it easy. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to check out the Instagram for images to go along with the episodes. We also have a Facebook group if you're on Facebook. All right, thanks a lot for all your support. Check out the Patreon for the interviews and the extended episodes, and take care of yourselves.